courtroom was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the soft scrape of a chair against polished wood. Sunlight cut through tall windows, landing on a woman standing alone at the defense table. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together, eyes fixed on the judge. The chair beside her, the one meant for her lawyer, was empty. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked open.
Is that what I think?
A man in a faded blue janitor's uniform stepped inside, gripping a mop handle like it was the only thing keeping him upright. No one noticed him yet, but in minutes, everything would change. Before we go any further, take a moment with me. Where are you watching this from right now? It still amazes me how one story can travel across cities, countries, even hearts. Drop your place below. Let's remind ourselves how connected we really are. The woman's name was Grace Whitmore. Once, her name meant power. Newspapers used to print it in bold letters, next to words like billionaire, visionary, industry queen. But today it was spoken in whispers, usually followed by something cruel. Fraud, betrayal, fall from grace. Grace stood there in a plain gray suit she bought herself just 2 days ago, after selling the last piece of jewelry she owned. It didn't fit perfectly. Nothing did anymore. Her lawyer had quit that morning. No warning.
Is that what I
No
think it is?
apology. Just a short text message sent at 6:12 a.m. I'm sorry. I can't continue representing you. Grace had stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for another message. None came. Now the judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the courtroom. Ms. Whitmore, he said calmly, do you have legal representation today? Grace swallowed. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The truth pressed down on her chest, heavy and humiliating. No, Your Honor, she finally whispered. I don't. A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward. Someone in the back scoffed quietly. The prosecution's lawyer allowed himself a thin, satisfied smile. Grace's knees felt weak, but she stayed standing. She had already lost her company, her home, her friends. She would not lose her dignity, too. From the side of the room, unnoticed by most, the janitor paused.
Is that what I think
His
it
name
is?
was Ethan Cole, 46 years old, divorced, quiet, the kind of man people looked through, not at. He'd been cleaning courthouse floors for nearly 11 years. He knew the rhythm of this place, the way power walked loudly and fear tried to stay invisible. Ethan had seen Grace before. Months ago, when the case first made headlines, she'd walked into this very building surrounded by lawyers, assistants, security. That day, she'd stopped when she saw him struggling to lift a heavy trash bag. Without a word, she'd helped him. Suited hands, expensive watch, but no hesitation. She'd smiled at him like he mattered. No one else had. That small moment had stayed with him longer than he expected. Now he watched her stand alone. The judge cleared his throat. This court strongly advises legal counsel. Without it, you are at a severe disadvantage. Grace nodded slowly. I understand.
Is that what I think
The
it is?
prosecutor stood. Your Honor, given the circumstances, we're prepared to proceed. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something heavier. He glanced down at the mop in his hands, then back at Grace. Her shoulders were straight, but her eyes were tired. Not guilty tired, worn tired. The kind that comes from being abandoned one piece at a time. Ethan took a step forward, then another. The sound of his shoes echoed louder than he expected. Heads turned. A bailiff frowned. The prosecutor looked confused. Sir, the bailiff whispered sharply, you can't? I will defend her. The words came out before Ethan had time to stop them. Clear, steady, loud enough to freeze the room. Grace turned around slowly, disbelief written across her face. The judge leaned forward. Excuse me, he said. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, but he didn't back away. I said, I will defend her, Your Honor. Laughter broke out somewhere behind him. A reporter shook his head. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, amused. And you are? The judge asked. Ethan Cole, he replied. I'm a janitor here. More laughter, sharper this time. Grace stared at him, eyes wide. You don't have to do this, she whispered. You'll get in trouble. Ethan finally looked at her. Really looked. Someone should have done it a long time ago, he said quietly. The judge sighed, rubbing his temple. Mr. Cole, are you a licensed attorney? No, sir, Ethan answered. Then, after a breath, but I studied law, night classes, years ago. I never finished. Life got in the way. The courtroom stilled again. The judge studied him carefully, then glanced at Grace. Ms. Whitmore,
is that what I think it is?
Do you consent to this man assisting you in any capacity the court allows? Grace hesitated. The safe answer was no. The logical answer was no. But logic had abandoned her long before that morning. She nodded. Yes, she said. I do. Ethan stepped closer to the defense table, setting his mop aside like a soldier laying down a civilian life. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. And as the judge called for a brief recess, no one noticed a small, almost invisible thing that shifted in the room. The quiet return of hope. The recess lasted only 10 minutes. But to Grace, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff for hours. She sat at the defense table, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Ethan stood beside her, suddenly unsure where to place himself. Without his mop, without his card, he felt exposed, like a man who'd stepped onto a stage without rehearsal. You really don't have to stay, Grace whispered, her voice barely carrying past the polish between them. They'll tear you apart. This case that destroys people. Ethan shook his head slowly. I know, he said. I've been watching it do that for months. She studied him then. Not the uniform, not the worn shoes, but his face. There was fear there, yes, but also something steadier. Resolve, the kind that didn't shout. Across the room, the prosecutor leaned over to one of the reporters, murmuring something that made them both smirk. Ethan noticed. He'd seen that look before, people who believed the ending was already written. The judge returned, his gavel tapping once. This court will proceed, he announced. However, Mr. Cole will not act as legal counsel. At best, he may assist a defendant in an advisory role. Any formal arguments must come directly from Ms. Whitmore. Grace's stomach dropped. Ethan leaned in, his voice low. That's okay, he said. I'll help you prepare. You won't be alone. She nodded, though doubt flickered across her face. Alone was all she'd been lately. The prosecutor stood confident, voice smooth as glass. He began laying out timelines, numbers, accusations. Words like embezzlement, intent, personal gain. Each sentence landed like a small hammer blow. Grace tried to focus, but her thoughts swam. She felt small, exposed. Like every mistake she'd ever made was being projected onto those courtroom walls. Ethan listened closely, not just to the words, but to what wasn't being said. When the prosecutor finished, the judge turned to Grace. Ms. Whitmore, he said gently, you may respond. Grace stood, legs trembling. She opened her mouth, then froze. Her mind went blank. That was when Ethan quietly slid a folded piece of paper toward her. She glanced down. Bullet points. Dates. Simple notes written in careful handwriting. Start with the audit, he whispered. The internal one. They skipped it. Grace took a breath. Then another. Yes, she said aloud, her voice gaining strength. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to address what the prosecution left out. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. She spoke slowly at first, then steadier. She explained the internal auditor company had commissioned years before the alleged fraud, how it had cleared her, how those records had mysteriously vanished after the board takeover. The prosecutor frowned. Ethan watched Grace come back to life word by word. It was like watching someone remember who they used to be. As Grace spoke, a memory surfaced in Ethan's mind. The day she'd helped her with that trash bag. He remembered how embarrassed he'd felt at first. How surprised. He remembered thinking, people like her don't notice people like me. But she had. That was the first kindness. And sometimes one kindness plants a seed that doesn't bloom until years later. If you had been standing there, watching a stranger step forward when everyone else walked away, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Or found the courage to act? Share your answer below. And if this moment stirred something in you, tap like, Not out of habit, but as a quiet promise that compassion still has a place. The judge listened intently, asking a follow-up question. Grace answered, then paused, glancing briefly at Ethan. He gave a small nod. Yes, she continued. And I'd also like to point out that the financial transfers in question occurred after I was removed as acting CEO. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor stiffened. Objection! Overruled, the judge said. She may continue. Grace felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. Not confidence exactly, but support. For the first time in months, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Hours passed. Evidence was reviewed. Dates questioned. The air grew stale. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, Grace felt drained but standing. As the courtroom emptied, a bailiff approached Ethan. You're not supposed to be doing this, he muttered. You know that, right? Ethan nodded. I do. You could lose your job. I know. The bailiff hesitated, then quietly said, For what it's worth, that was brave. Ethan swallowed. Outside the courthouse, dust had settled. Grace stepped onto the stone steps, the city lights flickering on one by one. She turned to Ethan. Why? She asked softly. Why help me? Ethan looked out at the street, at people passing by without a clue of what had just happened inside those walls. Because, he said, I know what it's like when the world decides you're already guilty. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but that day, the day a janitor stood beside her, was only the beginning, and the truth buried beneath years of lies was closer than any of them realized. That night, Grace didn't go home, because there was no home left to return to. Instead, she sat alone in a small rented room above a closed-down bakery, the smell of old sugar and dust lingering in the air. A single lamp cast weak yellow light across stacks of documents spread on the floor. Financial records, emails, board meeting minutes, pieces of a life that once made sense. Ethan sat across from her on the carpet, jacket folded neatly beside him. He'd insisted on coming, not as a hero, not as a savior, just as someone who refused to leave her alone with the dark. You don't have to stay, Grace said again, softer this time. I know, Ethan replied, but I will. They worked in silence for a while. Pages turned, pen scratched. Outside, a siren wailed, then faded. Grace watched Ethan as he read. The way his brow furrowed, the way he paused at certain lines like they meant more than numbers. You understand this, she said finally. Ethan nodded. Enough. She let out a small, humorless laugh. I used to pay people more in a month than you make in a year to understand less. Ethan didn't smile. Money doesn't always buy attention, he said. Or care. That landed harder than she expected. As the hours passed, something became clear. The prosecution's case wasn't just aggressive. It was selective. Emails missing entire threads. Transactions shown without context. Names removed. They're protecting someone, Ethan said quietly. Grace froze. Who? He tapped the document. The board member who replaced you, Michael Rowan. Grace's chest tightened. Michael, her former friend, her chosen successor. The man who'd hugged her after her husband's funeral and promised to protect the company like family. I trusted him, she whispered. Ethan looked up. That might be the point. The next morning, court resumed. This time, the atmosphere was different. The press leaned in closer. Whispers followed Grace as she walked in, not mocking now, but curious. Ethan took his place beside her again, invisible to most, vital to her. As testimony began, Grace felt the familiar ache of betrayal rise in her chest. Witnesses spoke carefully, rehearsed. Former employees who wouldn't meet her eyes. One of them, a young accountant named Lily, hesitated on the stand. Ms. Harper, Grace said gently when it was her turn to speak. You worked directly under me for 3 years. Did I ever ask you to falsify a report? Lily's hand shook. No. The prosecutor shot her a warning glance. And did anyone else? Grace asked. Lily swallowed. Silence stretched. Ethan leaned in, barely audible. Tell her to speak freely. The judge is watching. Ms. Harper, Grace said, voice steady. This is a courtroom. Not a boardroom. You're safe here. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Michael did, she whispered, after you were gone. The room erupted. The prosecutor objected. The judge banged his gavel. Order was restored, but something irreversible had happened. The truth had cracked the surface. During another short recess, Grace collapsed into her chair, shaking. I knew it, she breathed. I knew something was wrong. Ethan placed a glass of water in front of her. You weren't crazy, he said. You were silenced. Grace looked at him, eyes shining with pain and gratitude tangled together. Why do you see this so clearly? She asked. Ethan hesitated, then said, because I've been on the other side of power before. That evening, as rain streaked the courthouse windows, Ethan finally told her the part of himself he usually kept locked away. Years ago, he'd been studying law while working 2 jobs. Smart, driven, close to finishing. Then his younger brother had been arrested for something he didn't do. Ethan fought the system, tried to help, but without money, without connections, they lost. His brother took a plea deal. Prison broke him. He never recovered. And after that, Ethan said quietly, I stopped believing people like us ever really win. Grace listened, heart aching. Have you ever had someone stand by you when everyone else disappeared? She asked softly. If yes, say yes below, and tell me who they were. Sometimes gratitude deserves to be spoken out loud. The rain outside grew heavier. The next day brought the reveal Ethan had been waiting for. A forensic analyst testified that key files had been altered after Grace's removal. Digital fingerprints traced directly to Michael Rowan's private server. The prosecutor's confidence cracked. Michael himself was called to stand. He smiled too much, spoke too smoothly, but under pressure, his story slipped. Grace watched him unravel, feeling something close to vindication, but also grief. This was someone she'd loved like family. When court adjourned that afternoon, Michael was escorted out through a side door, avoiding the press. Grace and Ethan stood alone again in the now empty courtroom. This isn't over, Grace said. Ethan nodded. No, but it's turning. Neither of them noticed a man standing in the shadows near the back, a senior partner from a powerful law firm, watching Ethan with narrowed eyes. Interested, calculating. Change was coming, and it would demand a price neither of them was ready to pay. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still felt wash-raw. Grace arrived at the courthouse early, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Reporters were already gathering, cameras poised like predators sensing blood. Her name echoed again, but this time it carried a different tone. Not accusation. Suspense. Ethan entered through the staff door, as he always had. Same uniform. Same quiet steps. Yet everything felt altered. People glanced at him now. Some nodded. One clerk whispered, "That's him," like he was a rumor made flesh. Inside the courtroom, tension hummed beneath every sound. Michael Rowan's seat sat empty. His absence spoke louder than his presence ever had. The judge took his place. Proceedings resumed. The prosecution was unraveling, slowly, stubbornly, but unmistakably. Each new witness chipped away at the narrative they'd built. Financial experts confirmed tampered data. Timelines contradicted earlier claims. And Grace, guided by Ethan's steady preparation, answered with calm clarity that surprised even herself. During a brief pause, Grace leaned toward him. "I don't know how you're doing this," she whispered. Ethan didn't look at her. "I do," he said. "I'm finally finishing something I started a long time ago." Then it happened. The prosecutor stood again, voice tight. "Your Honor," he said, "the state would like to submit an additional witness." The doors opened. Michael Rowan walked in. Gasps rippled through the room. He looked smaller than Grace remembered. Pale, eyes darting. He took the stand without meeting her gaze. Under oath, the mask cracked. Emails were displayed on the screen. Messages he'd written, commands issued, threats implied. Lily's name appeared again. Others too. Employees pressured. Records altered. Blame redirected. Michael's voice faltered. He contradicted himself. Once. Twice. Then the judge leaned forward. "Mr. Rowan," he said evenly, "are you aware that lying under oath carries severe consequences?" Michael broke. "Yes," he whispered. "I did it." The words fell like shattered glass. Grace closed her eyes, not in triumph, but release. A weight she'd carried alone for years finally slid from her spine. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed out. The prosecutor sank into his chair. Ethan exhaled slowly, hands trembling at his sides. For the first time since this began, Grace allowed herself to cry. In that moment, before the verdict, before the headlines, pause here with me. Think about the last small good thing you did for someone, even if no one noticed. Share below, not to boast, but to remind others that quiet kindness still exists. Your words might reach someone who needs them tonight. The verdict came swiftly. Not guilty on all counts. Grace barely heard it at first. The judge's voice felt distant, like sound underwater. Then it hit her, not as joy, but as a deep, bone-weary relief. She sat down hard, covering her face as sobs finally broke free. Ethan stood frozen. The judge addressed the court once more, his gaze lingering briefly on Ethan. "This case," he said, "is a reminder that justice is not only upheld by those with titles, but by those with courage." Outside, chaos waited. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. Grace emerged into the daylight blinking, overwhelmed. Someone shoved a microphone toward her. "How does it feel to be free?" a reporter asked. Grace looked past them, at Ethan, standing a few steps back, already retreating into invisibility. She walked to him instead. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. "You saved my life." Ethan shook his head. "You saved it yourself." That night, the headlines exploded. Janitor turns the tide. Unlikely hero in Billionaire trial. Justice from the shadows. By morning, Ethan was summoned to the courthouse administrator's office. He already knew why. The administrator folded his hands, expression tight. "You violated protocol," he said. "You interfered with court proceedings. You acted outside your role." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." "You're suspended. Effective immediately." Ethan felt the words land, heavy but unsurprising. "I understand," he said quietly. As he cleared out his locker, he felt no regret, only a strange calm. He'd lost his job, but he'd found something else. Grace waited for him outside. "They can't do this," she said. "I'll call my lawyers." "No," Ethan interrupted gently. "It's okay." She stared at him, stunned. "You gave up everything for me." Ethan met her eyes. "I gave up something," he said. "Not everything." Grace didn't understand then. Not fully, but she would. Because sometimes the hardest part of redemption isn't winning. It's choosing what comes next. The city didn't slow down just because Grace's world had cracked open and stitched itself back together. Traffic still roared. People still hurried past each other with coffee cups and half-read headlines. But for Grace, every step felt unfamiliar, like walking through a place she'd once known by heart, now rearranged overnight. She insisted Ethan come with her to the small cafe across from courthouse. It was nothing special, chipped mugs, flickering lights, but it was quiet, safe. They sat by the window. For a moment, neither spoke. "You shouldn't have lost your job," Grace said finally, fingers wrapped tightly around her cup. "Not after what you did." Ethan gave a faint smile. "I didn't do it for a reward." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it worse." Silence settled again, heavier this time. Grace studied his hands, rough, scarred, steady, hands that scrubbed floors while powerful men rewrote her life behind closed doors. Hands that held her story together when it was falling apart. "I keep thinking about that day," she said softly, "when I helped you with the trash bag. I didn't even remember it until now." Ethan nodded. Funny how small moments echo. Across town, the fallout had already begun. Michael Rowan's arrest dominated the news cycle. Former board members released statements distancing themselves. Lawsuits stacked up like dominoes. Grace's name was cleared, but the empire she built was gone, dismantled piece by piece during her exile. That afternoon, Grace returned to what used to be her office building. She stood across the street, staring up at the glass tower that no longer belonged to her. A security guard she didn't recognize blocked the entrance. "I just wanted to look," she said. The guard hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Inside, everything smelled the same. Polished floors, faint citrus cleaner, but the soul was missing. Her name had been scraped off the wall. New logos hung where her vision once lived. Ethan waited near the door, hands in his pockets. "I thought winning would feel louder," Grace said quietly. "Happier." Ethan didn't rush to answer. "Sometimes," he said, "peace is quieter than pain. We're just not used to listening for it." That night, Grace lay awake in her rented room, staring at the ceiling. Freedom felt strange, almost undeserved. She thought about Lily, about the employees who'd been threatened into silence, about Ethan, now unemployed, invisible again, except to her. By morning, she'd made a decision. Grace called every law firm that had abandoned her. One by one, they answered with new enthusiasm, eager to reclaim her as a client now that her name was clean. She declined them all. Instead, she called Ethan. "I need you to come with me," she said. "To where?" he asked. "You'll see." They drove 2 hours out of city, past concrete and noise, into quieter streets lined with modest houses and overgrown lawns. They stopped in front of a low brick building with a faded sign, Community Legal Aid Center. Inside, the waiting room was full. Mothers holding tired children, elderly men clutching folders, people with the same look Grace had worn for months, overwhelmed, unheard. "This place is always underfunded," Grace said, "always drowning." Ethan looked around slowly. "I tried to volunteer here once," he admitted. "Years ago. They didn't have space." Grace turned to him. "They do now." Within weeks, the center expanded. New staff, new resources. Grace didn't put her name on the building. She didn't announce herself. She funded it quietly, intentionally. And she asked Ethan to lead it. "I'm not a lawyer," he said again, almost embarrassed. "You're something better," Grace replied. "You remember what it feels like to be powerless." The offer terrified him. "I'll fail," he said. Grace smiled gently. "Then you'll fail doing something that matters. If that moment touched something deep inside you, if it made your chest tighten just a little, leave a red heart below, not because it's expected, but because some emotions deserve to be felt together." The first case Ethan helped with was small. A tenant facing eviction over a paperwork error. No cameras, no headlines, just a woman crying with relief when she was allowed to stay in her home. Ethan stood in the hallway afterward, hands shaking. "This," he whispered, "this feels like winning." Grace watched him from a distance, heart full in a way money had never managed to fill. Months passed. Grace rebuilt her life slowly. Not the empire, something humbler. She spoke at universities about ethics. She met privately with people hurt by her company's collapse, offering apologies where needed, help where possible. One evening, she received a letter, handwritten, from Lily. "I stood up because you taught me how," it read. "Thank you for not letting them bury the truth." Grace pressed the letter to her chest, tears sliding down her cheeks. But not all wounds healed so easily. Late one night, Ethan sat alone in the legal aid office, staring at an old photo on his phone, him and his brother, years ago. The victory in court hadn't brought his brother back. It hadn't erased the damage. Grace noticed his distance. One evening, she asked, "Do you regret it, standing up in that courtroom?" Ethan looked at her for a long time. "No," he said honestly, "but some losses don't disappear just because you do the right thing." Outside, the city lights glowed softly. The story wasn't ending yet, because before true redemption comes peace. There is one final question the heart must answer. Winter arrived quietly that year. No dramatic snowfall, just a slow creep of cold that settled into bones and memories. The Legal Aid Center buzzed with space heaters and tired hope. People lined the hallway every morning before the doors opened, clutching folders, fears, and faith in equal measure. Ethan moved through it all with steady purpose. He learned names, stories, patterns of injustice that repeated themselves with different faces. Every case chipped away at him, but it also rebuilt something he thought he'd lost forever. Grace watched him change. Not louder, not prouder, but fuller, like a man finally standing in the right light. One evening, as the center closed, Grace found Ethan sitting alone in the consultation room, lights dimmed, elbows on the table. A letter lay open in front of him. "Bad news?" she asked gently. Ethan didn't look up. "From my brother's old public defender," he said. "They're reviewing past cases. There's a chance, a small one, that they might reopen his." Grace's heart lifted. "That's incredible." Ethan finally met her eyes. There was hope there, but it was fragile, afraid. "They need someone to testify," he said. "Someone who helped push him into that plea deal." Grace felt the shift instantly. Michael Rowan. Ethan nodded. Silence stretched between them. Michael had been sentenced months ago. Reduced time, cooperation agreement. He was already appealing for leniency, citing remorse. The system moved fast when it wanted to. "He won't do it," Grace said quietly. "Testify would destroy any chance he has left." "I know," Ethan replied. "And asking him," he shook his head. "I don't know if I can." Grace sat across from him, hands folded. "You don't have to decide tonight." But Ethan already felt the weight pressing down. That night, sleep didn't come easily. For either of them, Grace lay awake thinking about Michael, about betrayal layered on top of grief, about how he looked on the stand, broken, exposed, small. She hated what he'd done. She hated what it had cost her. But hatred, she was learning, was heavy to carry for too long. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the correctional facility, breath fogging the air. Grace waited in the car. She hadn't offered advice, just presence. Inside, the visiting room smelled of disinfectant and regret. Michael was brought in, thinner than before, eyes hollowed by consequences. When he saw Ethan, confusion flickered across his face. "You," Michael said hoarsely. "The janitor." Ethan sat down slowly. "The man you tried to bury," he corrected, just like Grace. Michael's shoulders slumped. "I didn't think you'd ever come." "I didn't come for you," Ethan said. "I came for my brother." Michael swallowed. "I can't help you." "You can," Ethan replied evenly. "You just won't." Silence. Michael stared at the table. "If I testify, I lose everything. Any chance of parole. Any deal." Ethan leaned forward, voice tight. "You already took everything from people who trusted you." Michael laughed bitterly. "So that's it? You want revenge?" Ethan paused. The word echoed louder than he expected. "No," he said finally. "I want truth." Michael looked up, eyes red. "Truth won't save me." Ethan stood. "It might save someone else." He turned to leave. "Wait," Michael said suddenly, panic breaking through. "Does Grace know you're here?" Ethan stopped. "She knows I'm trying to decide what kind of man I want to be." Michael closed his eyes. When Ethan returned to the car, Grace didn't ask questions. She just watched his hands tremble as he fastened his seatbelt. Days passed. Then a call came. Michael Rowan had agreed to testify. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Ethan sat in the courtroom again, but this time his heart wasn't steady. When Michael took the stand and spoke, every word felt like reopening old scars. He confessed fully, named names, described pressure, deals, manipulation, including the same tactics used against Ethan's brother. The judge listened. The record changed. When it was over, Ethan walked out into the cold sunlight feeling hollow. Justice had moved, but it didn't feel like victory. Grace found him on the courthouse steps. "It's done," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I don't know how to feel." Grace hesitated, then asked the question she'd been holding back for weeks. "Could you forgive him?" Ethan stared ahead, jaw tight. "Be honest. If you were in his place, after everything that was stolen and broken, could you forgive? Type forgive if you could, or never, if the pain would be too deep to cross." The appeal worked. Months later, Ethan's brother walked free. Thinner, quieter, but alive. The reunion was awkward at first, then desperate, then healing in the only way healing ever happens, slowly, imperfectly. Grace watched from a distance as the brothers sat together on a park bench, not speaking, just existing in the same space again. That night, Ethan stood outside the legal aid center long after everyone left. "I don't hate him anymore," he told Grace. "But I don't feel peace yet." Grace nodded. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the wound," she said. "It just stops it from bleeding forever." Ethan breathed deeply, the cold air filling his lungs. The hardest storms were finally behind them, but something gentler, something brighter, was beginning to rise. And soon, hope would ask one last thing of them both. Spring arrived the way healing often does. Quietly, almost apologetically. Trees bloomed along the streets near the legal aid center, their petals scattered across cracked sidewalks like small promises. The waiting room was still full every morning, but something had changed. Laughter surfaced now and then. Relieved, too, Ethan's brother, Daniel, began volunteering at the center, not because he had to, but because he needed to. He organized files, fixed broken chairs, listened more than he spoke. Some days were harder than others. Some nights, the past crept back in, but he stayed. Grace visited less often now, not because she cared less, but because she'd learned when to step back. The center didn't need her shadow. It needed room to breathe. One afternoon, as Ethan walked Daniel home, a woman stopped him on the sidewalk, elderly, nervous, clutching a worn envelope. "You're him," she said, voice shaking. "The one who helped my son." Ethan blinked. I just listened." She pressed the envelope into his hands. Inside was a handwritten note and a photo of a small boy smiling. "He sleeps at home now," she whispered. "Thank you." Ethan stood frozen long after she left. That night, he found Grace sitting alone on the steps of the center, watching the sun dip behind the buildings. "I don't know how to carry all of this," he admitted. "The gratitude, the grief, the responsibility." Grace smiled faintly. "You don't carry it alone," she said. "You let it walk beside you." Weeks later, Grace received an invitation she didn't expect. A National Ethics Council wanted her to speak. Not about her fall, but about what came after. About accountability without bitterness. About rebuilding without erasing the past. She hesitated. "What if I say the wrong thing?" she asked Ethan. He shrugged. "Then you'll say it honestly." The auditorium was full. Faces turned toward her, some admiring, some skeptical. Grace stepped to the podium, hands steady now. "I once believed success meant control," she said. "Then I lost everything, and learned the difference between power and purpose." She spoke about Ethan, without naming him, about the man who stood up when the room expected silence, about how justice sometimes arrives wearing ordinary clothes. The audience rose in applause, but Grace's eyes searched only one place. Later that evening, she found Ethan sitting alone at the back of the now empty hall. "They were clapping for you," he said. Grace shook her head. "They were clapping for the idea that people like you exist." He smiled at that. As summer approached, the Legal Aid Center expanded again. Another branch. More volunteers. More quiet victories. One evening, Daniel asked Ethan, "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Ethan thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "I miss who I thought I was supposed to be. But I like who I am now." Grace overheard that. It stayed with her. On the anniversary of the verdict, the center held a small gathering. No press, no speeches, just food, laughter, and shared stories. Lily came. So, did the tenant Ethan had helped first, dozens of lives intersecting, because one man had refused to stay silent. As the sun set, Grace raised her glass. "To courage," she said, "the quiet kind." Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest, not pride, but belonging. If you believe stories like this still matter, if you believe love, courage, and goodness haven't faded from the world, comment amen below. Let's fill this space with hope. Someone reading might need to see it tonight. Later, as the crowd thinned, Grace and Ethan stood together under the soft glow of string lights. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Grace smiled. "Now, we keep going." He nodded. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something settle inside him. Not excitement, not relief, but peace. And as the lights dimmed and voices faded, one final truth waited to be spoken. A truth that would gently close the story and open something new. The night grew quieter after everyone left. Paper plates were stacked, chairs folded, lights dimmed one by one inside the legal aid center. Outside, the city breathed in its late-hour rhythm. Distant traffic, a passing laugh, the hum of something still alive. Grace lingered near the doorway, watching Ethan lock up. "You didn't have to stay," he said, turning the key. "I wanted to," she replied. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing to leave. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of spring flowers mixed with asphalt. "Do you ever think about that day?" Grace asked. "In the courtroom?" Ethan nodded slowly. "More than I expected." "So do I," she said. "I think about how easily it could have gone differently. How you could have stayed quiet. How I could have walked out alone." Ethan looked at her then. Really looked. Not the billionaire who fell. Not the woman the headlines devoured. Just Grace. Someone who had been broken and chose not to harden. "I didn't stand up because I was brave," he said. "I stood up because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. They walked a few blocks together, before parting ways. At her door, Grace hesitated. "There's something I never said," she admitted. "Back then when I lost everything. There were nights I didn't think I'd make it through. Not because of prison, because of silence, of being erased." Ethan listened, jaw clenched. "You didn't just defend me," she continued. "You reminded me I still existed." Ethan swallowed hard. "You did the same for me." They stood there, the weight of all that had passed resting gently between them, no longer crushing, just real. Months later, a small plaque appeared inside the legal aid center. No names in bold, no grand dedication, just a single sentence etched into brushed steel. "Justice begins the moment someone refuses to look away." People often stopped to read it. Some nodded, some cried quietly. Most never knew the full story behind it. Ethan never corrected them. Life didn't become perfect. It never does. There were still hard cases. Still nights when old memories returned uninvited. Still moments when Grace felt the ache of everything she'd lost. But something fundamental had changed. They had found meaning, not in winning, but in choosing. One afternoon, years later, a young janitor started work at the center. Nervous. Head down. Ethan noticed him struggling with a heavy bag. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward. "Here," he said, lifting one end. "I've got you." The young man smiled, surprised. "Thanks." Grace watched in the hallway. Heart full. The cycle continued. "Before we close this story, if it moved you, even a little, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for a video, but for the soul who carried this pain and still chose kindness. One small click can be a way of saying, I saw you. I felt it too." Later that evening, Grace sat alone at her desk, writing in a notebook she kept now, not business plans, but reflections. She paused and wrote, "Power didn't save me. Money didn't save me. A human being did." She closed the notebook, eyes damp but peaceful. Somewhere across the city, Ethan walked home under soft streetlights, hands in his pockets, breathing evenly. For the first time in his life, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to walk toward. And that is the quiet truth this story leaves behind. You don't have to be powerful to change a life. You don't have to be seen to matter. Sometimes, all it takes is one ordinary person standing up and saying, "I will